Eagle 7 here. In this video I'd like to discuss vortex ring state and settling with power. Yes, we'll touch that third rail in DCS. First, let's define what vortex ring state is. And it is a purely aerodynamic condition. And in normal flight, whether climbing, descending, or cruising, the relative airflow striking the blade is particularly from ahead. We talked about that. The relative wind over the rotor disc makes it a lot more efficient. When we get into VRS, the helicopter starts to descend into its own vortex or rotor downwash, which is then recirculated as the helicopter descends faster than the vortex itself. That results in that recirculated air being drawn up and then pushed vertically down back into the rotor system. So essentially we're descending into our own rotor wash, which is disturbed air, and it gets recirculated back into the rotor system as disturbed air. This causes a critical increase in the angle of attack of the rotor blades and a corresponding loss of lift, causing the helicopter to descend even faster, up to rates of about 6,000 feet per minute. In order for the helicopter to descend into its own rotor wash or vortex, it must meet three conditions at the same time. So let's talk about those three conditions. First, we have to have less than 30 knots airspeed, greater than 300 feet per minute rate of descent, and more than 30% power applied to the rotor. That would be our collective or torque. To recover, we need to recognize it early, recognize that we have a high sink rate, and as we increase collective, we're either not arresting our desync rate or our sink rate is increasing. As soon as we notice those two conditions happening, we need to recover by slowly and gently pushing the cyclic forward, lowering the nose, gaining airspeed, and to fly out of that condition. Settling with power is very similar to VRS. What you are going to feel and see and the result is going to be the same, but it's caused by a slightly different phenomenon, and at its simplest it is not an aerodynamic effect. It occurs when you need X amount of power to stop your descent. But for a lot of reasons, like we discussed in my previous video, high, hot, and heavy, you have less power available than what you need to hover. So by increasing your collective, you're going to either exceed your torque limit or you're going to exceed your rotor limit. You're going to get a low rotor. Exceeding any of these limitations is going to cause the rotor to drag, to decrease lift, and just make the problem worse. The slower the helicopter flies, the more power it requires to hover. We know that. We've demonstrated that in the high, hot, and heavy video. So what I want to demonstrate here today is I have a helicopter. It's fully loaded with fuel, fully armed. It weighs almost 19,000 pounds. We're at Nellis on a hot summer day. I think Nellis is about 18,000 feet above sea level. And we have 36 degrees C, which is 102 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've got our high, hot, and heavy conditions met. So first I'm just going to demonstrate how when we have a high sink rate, low airspeed, and apply power, that we will not have enough collective to arrest our descent and will more than likely hit the ground. And then I'll reset and I'll show you the recovery procedure. So let's get started. So on approach to Nellis, we realize we're a little high and we're a little fast. So we lower our collective. We start to pitch our nose up to bleed off our airspeed. And there's 30 knots, 24 knots. Trying to hit the numbers. We have a really bad sink rate. Now we start to increase our collective almost to the top. Still have 3,000. I have no more collective left.
Rotor RPM low.
And we make contact with the ground.
Rotor RPM low.
Now let me go ahead and reset that and I'll show you the recovery technique. Okay, we're back at Nellis. We're on final approach. We realize we're too high, so we lower our collective. We try to get down fast and slow down so we can land on the numbers. And during our descent, we realize we have a really high sink rate, and as we increase our collective, we can't slow that sink rate. We need to recognize early that we may be in either VRS or we may be settling with power, and in this case it's probably both. We have the high, hot, and heavy scenario going, which would be settling with power. It's not an aerodynamic factor, but we also have the slow airspeed, high sink rate. So let's go ahead and see if we can initiate the recovery procedure, which would be to recognize it early, ease forward on the cyclic, lower the nose, increase our airspeed, and fly out of it. We would rejoin the traffic pattern and set ourselves up for a shallow approach to a run-on landing, which we'll discuss in another video. So let's get started. This time we're going to recover. So on our initial approach, we lower our collective, right pedal, half cyclic. Our sink rate's almost 3,000 feet a minute. We're at 500 feet, we realize something's not right. We increase our collective, nothing's happening, so nose the aircraft over. Build that airspeed up. Slowly increase your collective. And fly out of VRS.